Hey everybody, I'm Julie.
I'm Tricia. We're so excited to be back with you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with us while we shared our personal testimonies as we've been diving into God of Process. And we are, in a way, still diving into that, in a way, still continuing on that revelation. But during both of our journeys, God did this kind of major, what I would call a life-defining kind of revelation for us that has become part of when I'm counseling or life coaching with my college students or with friends. It has become such a not just a banner, but it's the go-to because it's such a point of honestly confusion and it just really smooths out so much. And so we want to dive into it today. And so we are going to be diving into our words. So the past couple of weeks have been super personal. And this week, it also personal. We're not able to avoid it.
It'll be personal, but it's much more... we just want to dive really deep into the words. So if you're driving, if you're listening to this while you're driving, or you're at a place where you can't take notes, by all means, go ahead and listen, but you want to come back and take some notes. Yeah, this has become, hopefully, this has become major part of our verbiage to each other, how we encourage each other and speak to each other. So,
and I think even in the first episode, I mentioned how I have to reduce prayers down to a yes or no. Mm-hmm. God, is this still where you want me? And it was during this season where I had to really reduce prayers down to okay, today, am I still called to this place? Today, am I where you want me? I can do one more day today, when I'm about to walk out of somewhere, today, am I where you want me? And it was during this season of knowing full and well that there was something next, there was something more in my future. And so having a promise, but not being in the promised land and feeling that tension, really, I think is where this kind of revelation comes from. It's from that place of tension of, I know what God has for me. I know that there's something more, but here I am today.
For sure. So we're hopping in. This is the And She Laughs podcast.
Okay, so we are going to dive into this. Julie, what was it? We haven't even said what it is. Dive into this for us. I think you're...
Right. Well, first, I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm here with 4 pages of notes, and Tricia has just got her Bible because... this is what knocking on 40 looks like. I am knocking on 40's door like she's baking cookies or she's got Waffle House hash browns.
22 months apart.
It's true, but so she has a memory like nobody's business.
I lived it. It's a memory.
It's my memory too, but this bank only holds so much. So anyway... So where this story kind of begins, just diving into it, Ben and I were about chin deep into our second campus plant for our church. We're a multi-site church, and we were doing multi-site before multi-site was a thing. Especially in our area. Nobody really knew what multi-site was, so we were setting up and tearing down in a middle school, and we had a couple of families that were really having a hard time connecting to the multi-site idea. We had
one screen.
And that was one of the things. We had one family in particular. One week it was, I really hate that we're watching preaching on a screen. And then the next week it was, I really hate that we're setting up and tearing down in a middle school. And then the next week was, I hate that we're having youth group in a coffee shop. Because, Jesus doesn't move in.
Well, I just think that it's worth also saying that we had t-shirts that were I got saved in a
middle school cafeteria.
So
it was
perspective's a big deal.
Absolutely. I mean, we were seeing
life change happening.
Major like revival and all of that. But this particular family was really having a difficult time. So I remember Ben went to the dad one week and was like, dude, did God call you here? Because if he did be in, and the guy was like, no, he did. He called us here. And it was a couple of weeks later, I was sitting with Ben in the middle of service. Worship had gone so beautifully. The screen was coming down, and I realized I hadn't seen that family in a little bit. Mm. And I leaned over to Ben, and I was like, hey, where's so-and-so? And he was like, oh, they're gone. And I didn't hear anything else that happened in the service. Mm. The Spirit began to just pour out on me, and I was typing down the notes that the Spirit was saying to me as fast as possible. And it was a really amazing revelation of this clear message. Details are not direction. That was the very first line I typed down. And let me clarify what that means. Good. Okay. So let's just look in Daniel, for instance. Okay. So Daniel is abducted from his home. Nebuchadnezzar conquers the Israelites, and he brings the most attractive, the wisest, and he puts them in his court. Yeah. And Daniel is brought, and
Daniel's impressive.
He is impressive. He's called to serve an evil pagan king.
Yeah.
Okay. God's direction for Daniel is to serve the king. The details are he's an evil pagan king. How about some other details? How about the fact that his name was Daniel? That means God is my judge. He got his name changed to Belshazzar. That means Baal protect the king. Those are details. He was called to serve the king. God put him in a place where those details don't feel so good.
Sure. And let me emphasize really quick in this details versus direction. So God speaks something. He says,
right,
Daniel, you're my guy.
Right.
I'm going to use you.
For sure.
You're going to change the nation. And then he's like, Daniel ends up serving a pagan god. So what we mean when we're saying details versus direction, God speaks in direction. God speaks in a promise. God speaks in, this is where you're going.
Right.
This is what you're purposed for. I have placed this inside of you. It is undeniable.
You're called to this.
You are called to this.
You're to do this.
And so then you start down this path towards this direction because God speaks the direction. You're like, that's really exciting.
Exactly. And like, then, hey, I want you to start a podcast. Well, the details are that we're mothers and we have lots of children and we serve in the church and there's only 24 hours in a day. And
so I'm not undermining details.
Right.
I'm actually saying that details feel so detrimental that they actually feel like a new direction. And that is where we get off path, we get confused, we get discouraged, that's where the rejection mindset can set in. This is where, and it's where I've missed it.
Sure.
Is that what I really heard from God? Is this what I'm really supposed to be doing? Because if I were Daniel and I was like, I'm going to shake a nation for the Lord.
Right.
And I was like, I'm serving a pagan king who is making a law that we can only pray to him.
Right.
That seems like, if you're looking at it in black and white, right versus wrong, that seems like a detail that should change the direction.
Right.
You should not serve this king.
Well, and not just that.
Flee. You should save yourself.
Yeah, and if Daniel's called to a nation, he wasn't even in his nation. He was removed from his nation.
For sure.
But the fact of the matter is, we allow details to shift our direction.
We do.
God calls us, let's say, for instance, to a house, a church. God calls us to be there, but we allow the little details, the little foxes that spoil the vine.
Only if you end up in a non-perfect church. That only happens if you
lean in. Guys, if you're not in a perfect church, man, I don't know.
Actually, if you found a perfect church, you should leave because you're going to jag it up.
That's so real.
But that's what we expect. We expect, because it is the bride of Christ,
Right.
we expect a level of perfection. We expect, and we can spiritualize it. We can say, no, I just want excellence. I want to see blah, 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 blah. But the actual bottom line is the church is blemished and is going to disappoint you. People are faulted and they are going to disappoint you. And disappointment, frankly, is a detail. And it's a sucky detail. It's a strong detail. But it is not a direction.
No.
And it does not change the direction.
Right. And also, details are meant to like sand the rough edges off of us. Like, we're supposed to receive details and go, okay, God, you gave me this directive. This detail doesn't feel warm and fuzzy, but I'm going to let it change me the way that I'm supposed to. Details are supposed to change your perspective of something. Sure. Details are supposed to do something inside of you, not send you out the door or send you running or packing.
Yeah.
I also think details a lot of times, I'm gonna say it, are feelings. Details are feelings. I had a conversation with a student last night, and she was really wrestling with, I don't feel God. I don't feel God. And I was like, how about you open up to John and see what John has to say about it? John says that the Word was with God and the Word was God. So how about if you need to feel God, just open up your Word and put your hands on it. How about you feel God that way? Because let me tell you something. Nobody asked me, Julie, does Ben still give you butterflies? Do you know why? Because my relationship with Ben has matured past the point of needing butterflies to stick around.
Sure.
And I do think that feelings become details to us. They were like, I don't feel this. This doesn't feel good to me. That hurt my feelings. I'm out.
For sure. But details are also, like I said, like detrimental things. And so when I think about this overall thought, I think about, like, let's say God puts you on a path. You see the road and you're like, there it is.
Yeah.
He calls you to a certain job. He calls you to foster. He calls you to whatever it is, whatever he sets you on this path, and you're like, okay, this is the path. Let's go down this road.
This is the way.
And here's the thing, you're riding down the road and you come upon, a broken down bridge, and you're like, I have to build a bridge to go down this road. And here's the thing, God actually doesn't reveal details to us when he gives us the direction, because most of the time we wouldn't sign up for the direction.
Right. We wouldn't even start the trip.
We wouldn't, like, truly. And I look at my own life. I look at our biblical examples. We look at Abraham, the father of nations. The first time that the words Jehovah Jireh, God our provider, are used in the Bible, it is because Abraham has called on the name of the Lord.
Yes.
And the Lord had said to Abraham, I will birth the nations. Your descendants will outnumber the stars in the sky. What a beautiful. And so Abraham's like, yes, that's what I want. I want babies. I don't know what he said. But what I do know is that his wife, Sarah, so they're waiting for this promise. His wife, Sarah, well, guys, she was 90.
Yeah. We're so in the same wavelength. You need to know.
90. Yeah. And I have to tell you, I am a 37-year-old mother of one, and I'm tired. And I know what childbirth did to this body. And I think that Sarah gets a really bad reputation when she laughed at God, because I think she lost her mind for a second.
Right.
I think
she was like, Lord, this uterus is so dusty. Like, how you gonna birth the nations? This is.
There are no eggs.
Right.
It's chicken.
But y'all, that's a detail.
But that was a detail. And it seems like this is a change of direction, which is why Abraham got confused and slept with the servant girl. And
she was like, let me bring in your handmaiden. Come on in, girl.
Because
that's what happened.
The direction didn't make sense. And that's because we serve a supernatural God.
Good.
He doesn't need to give us all of the details, because he supersedes the details. He supersedes that she was 90 and made her have a child. Right. Like, it's crazy. So he's working in the supernatural. out, and he can, if we're on this path, if we're on and we see this broken down bridge, he helps build the bridge. But it's so overwhelming and it's so daunting that sometimes we would not sign up for the path if we knew the details.
Right.
And so we get going down this path, and we run into new information that seems detrimental. That and what can happen is the enemy can put in this foothold and deceive us into saying, hey, this is a turn in your path. You're still on the same direction, baby. You're still doing this. It's just that it looks different.
Right.
And it
there's
does
a detour.
Look
I'm just going to take you on a detour. You're still going to end up in the same place.
For sure. And for me, what in my story, Danny and I, we've always dreamed of doing ministry together. In our first 6 years of marriage, we got to do that. We were youth pastors, Memphis. Actually, some of my Memphis babies text me after our first podcast because they listened in, and I love you so freaking much. Can we say freaking on this podcast?
Oh, we say freaking in real life, and I say crap too.
I think I'm not a bad worder, but I do say freaking in real life.
I say crap.
Anyway, shout out to you. But my some of my Memphis babies, we loved our life in Memphis. We loved our kids. And actually, when we went to come down here, when we talked to our pastor, he actually said that he had a job for Danny and he had a job for me. So we sold our house. Yeah. We said goodbye to our kids, which in some ways was, frankly, as far as facing it, we had both lost a parent in that same year, but walking away from our students was a different and almost deeper level of grieving and mourning, because we didn't live in the same state as my dad or his mom, as Danny's mom. And so we were kind of in a lot of ways able to shove it to the side and choose when we mourn. Right. But our students were like breath to us. They were at our house all the time. It was awful. Walking away from Memphis was one of the hardest things, but God had given us a direction. Yes. We believed it. So we sell our house. We moved down here, and we ended up in a very tiny
little
cabin.
Studio apartment cabin,
which is fine.
It was so cute.
But we go to meet with our pastor, who's an incredible man of God. And he was talking to Danny about the job that he had for him. And he said, we actually, Trish, the job that we thought you were going to fill, we already filled it. But don't worry, we have a job for you. Mm-hmm. I found a job for you. And I was like, what? And it wasn't, I didn't feel like it was dishonest. I didn't feel deceived. I actually knew I had a spiritual strength, a confidence that okay, God did this. The setup was God's. Right. We wouldn't have moved here. Right. and he wanted us here. And so I started working in an office with, like I said, first episode, good people. Amazing. Great job. Mm-hmm. I made great money. I enjoyed the job. It wasn't where I wanted to be. And in that regard, that job actually got a pretty poor version of me, because I was terrified that God had removed me from ministry. I didn't see it as a process. I saw it as a change of direction. I did not see that God was still on path, that I was still on path. I didn't. Philippians 1:6 says, being confident that he who began a work will continue performing it until the day of Christ Jesus. And that's one of my favorite verses. Me too. But I had lost that confidence. Yes. And I didn't even realize it because I was deceived. Right. I got so caught up on my details that I thought the direction had changed. And truly the parallel for me, I know for you it was Daniel. Yeah. For me, my parallel was David. Yeah. We look in 1 Samuel 15, Saul loses his mind. He actually, and we're going to dive into that later, but becomes just a completely different person, very self-absorbed, very mentally unstable. And immediately next chapter, Samuel anoints David to be king. David finds favor, and right there, same chapter, David starts serving Saul in the kingdom. And so the reason that this parallels is because David was anointed for something, he was promised something, and he immediately started working in the kingdom that he was promised.
Right.
I felt the same way. Danny and I had been promised something. We got married. We started doing something that we dreamed about. Yeah. David defeats Goliath. David gets a lot of popularity. Saul, the king, gets very jealous of David's popularity and tries to kill him. Now, I don't know about you guys. If someone's trying to kill me, that does not feel like a detail.
Right.
That's a strong detail.
Right.
Throw a spear at me.
Yeah. Well,
throw a spear at me.
I also would like to caveat here and say that this feels fitting in that we feel like we can't even talk about abuses this day and age because it's like, oh, that's abuse. Like, we are so inundated with this doctrine of self-care, self-love.
For sure.
That whole you do, you boo movement that, like, we don't even say die to self. Put yourself on the cross daily.
It weakens resilience.
Yeah.
It weakens resilience when you're like, I have to stop what I'm doing so I can take care of myself. I'm not saying you shouldn't stop and take care of yourself.
Correct.
I'm saying that the Holy Spirit should be the one directing you to do that instead of your flesh.
Right. Because
there are times that God says, keep pushing. Through my supernatural strength, we're going to see this through. We're going to continue doing this. But there are times that the Holy Spirit's going, I need you to soak. I need you to rest.
Absolutely.
And you have to know the voice of God.
Yes.
So that you are not deceived
right.
by details.
And also, that's why he calls us to Sabbath.
For sure.
Like, recently I had someone... I'm not great at Sabbath, but I know what kind of person I am if I don't Sabbath. On the other side of Sabbath, I'm just a miserable human being, and I'm a terrible wife and mom. But God calls us to Sabbath once a week. Honestly, if you aren't Sabbath, like you're not Sabbathing, is that a word? Sabbathing?
Yeah, man.
I think I made it up. But
let's just put your name. They're going to put Julie Ragsdale right there in Webster's.
I'm dreaming of this right now. If you aren't Sabbathing, it's sin.
It is.
It's sin. It's because there's no renewal inside of you. You have, just like you need 8 hours of sleep at night for the body to work, you need the Sabbath for the spirit to work.
And to be very honest with you, if you're not Sabbathing, you are actually in a lifestyle of sin.
Yeah.
Doesn't that hurt?
Ooh, that hurts my feelings.
So sorry.
That hurts my feelings.
Because I don't feel like I said it. I feel like the word said it. So I feel like I can say I'm sorry. Honestly. Okay. So David is in the kingdom, serving where he is called, the very kingdom that God told him he's going to rule.
Yeah.
And he has to flee. And for us, we were in our promise, our kingdom per se. We were doing ministry together, and God moved us.
Yeah.
And when God moved David, David spent the next many years in a cave. And they were hard years, and they were dark years, but they were completely part of the process. They were absolutely necessary for him to become king, for him to be who he was supposed to be, for him to be to write the Psalms, and that he had to spend years in the cave to write the Psalms. And I can't say that my years were, I call them cave years because they were hard. They were hard emotionally. It's not because I was in a bad place necessarily. It's because I was in a bad place.
Right. But details develop us.
Details
are like the dark room of our life, where a picture develops into something else. Like, it's the dark room of our life. And it's not that details aren't bad. In fact, God orders details. If you don't think God is a God of details, don't even read Deuteronomy, because you're going to get bogged down. Or Leviticus. You're going to get bogged down in the details, Dave. But God orders the details.
You should read those, by the way.
Yeah, don't ever exempt anything. Yep, back to that. But God orders the details to sand the rough edges off of us and to clarify our direction. I feel like details in some cases and should have the power of clarification.
Yeah.
Oh, I set my eyes like flint.
Yeah.
On this.
Yeah.
That the Lord has called me to.
This does not change who I am. This does not change what God has called me to.
Yes.
And so David, anointed to be king around the age of like 13 to 15, he did not become king until he was 30.
Right.
He spent years serving the kingdom. Then he spent time living in caves with Saul, continuing to try to kill him. And I just related to this because I was like, I've tasted my promise and then I was removed from it.
Right.
But I will see it again.
Right.
And for me, the details were, they did feel detrimental. Yes. And like I'd said in, last week, I did get confused. I found myself complaining. I found myself in a place where I felt rejected. I found myself, and so for me, when I stopped trusting God's direction, I began to come up with my own direction. Mm-hmm. So when I had Jude, I was like, oh, I figured God out.
Yeah.
I'm going to be, he wants me to be like a mom, like a stay-at-home mom. My mom was an incredible stay-at-home mom. My sister is an incredible stay-at-home mom who also runs a business, but she was a stay-at-home mom, before she did that. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. Tricia Thayer, stay-at-home mom. Who would have thought? Nobody. God didn't say it or think it either. But Jude was about 4 months old when Danny came like home from work. And I was like, I'm not a stay-at-home mom. I'm a worker. I am a worker, Danny. I have to work. And if you don't take this child, he's going through a window. And that was really raw. But that was really what I said, and I felt like I should share it. And Danny's like, give me the child, go for a walk, please, for the love of God. But what we do when we get caught in directions or when we get caught in details instead of God's direction for us, we start making our own path.
We do.
We start making our own identity. And we can be years into that before we're like, why have I thought this is who I am? Yeah. Why have I, what? Right. And so I think next week we are going to continue diving into this because something that God also said that we're going to elaborate on next week is that, like, okay, so a direction is not a detail. A detail is not a direction, but also a delay is not a denial.
That's really good.
And so I hope that this encourages you.
And I know that we're really candid about all of the things that we went through. You need to know.
I would never throw my child through.
Yeah, no. But we shared this with each other in a time that was years ago. That was a decade ago that we shared this revelation with each other. Yeah. We've always been each other's encourager. We call each other. She's sometimes on first call and she shouldn't be, but that's what we do for each other. And this has become verbiage in our relationship with each other. Is this, Julie, is this direction?
Has God redirected you? Or are you feeling stuck?
Right.
Or,
And if you're out there listening and you're watching, you're like, man, these girls have really got it all together. You aren't listening very closely. I will tell you that yesterday when our first episode dropped, I was listening to it. I was having a come apart. I really was. I was listening to it. I didn't like the way my voice sounded. There was a lot of things I didn't like about myself, but the main thing was I feel so exposed. And then the realization of, oh my gosh, next week I'm going to be sharing my story, and it is very raw, and I heard the Spirit say to me, Julie, what scares you so much about that? And I said, well, it's always been mine to share how I wanted to. I got to pick and choose who heard that story, even though I've shared that story in the room of 2,000 people before. It's my story, and I get to pick and choose who hears it. And the Spirit said to me, do you trust me with your story?
Yeah.
And I am still following the direction of the Lord.
Yeah.
And those details do not change. My fear does not change. He has directed me to do this, to share, to love, to offer
And
my testimony and
Proverbs
story.
3, it says, write on the tablet of your heart his love and his faithfulness. On the tablet of your heart, his love. On the tablet of your heart, his faithfulness. And if you hear anything out of our stories, I hope that you're hearing, wow, they were so broken. But God is so big.
God.
And he's a supernatural God. And here's the thing, is he's not like, we're not his favorites. What he's done for us, he will do for you.
Right.
So,
amen.
We love you. Please continue sending us prayer requests.
Yeah, we really love that.
We love being able to pray for you, encourage you. Send us feedback. Anyway, we love you.
Love you. See you next week.